In the foothills of North Mountain, a stone's throw from uptown Phoenix, Arizona, lies the quaint Sunny Slope neighborhood. It was in May 1992 on a warm Tuesday afternoon that 13-year-old Brandy Myers embarked on a mission. Her school had organized a bookathon, challenging students to read as many books as possible within a set time frame. Determined to emerge victorious, Brandy canvassed the Sunny Slope neighborhood door to door, rallying support from neighbors. By 7 that evening, she made a pit stop at a nearby convenience store just a couple of blocks from home, securing another sponsor before heading back. Yet as night descended and Brandy failed to return home, her parents grew frantic, eventually contacting the authorities to report her disappearance. Despite exhaustive efforts from the police, family, and friends, Brandy seemed to vanish without a trace. Months turned into years, leaving her family shattered by the trauma, while her younger sister, Kristen, relentlessly pursued clues in hopes of finding her missing sibling. Fast forward 6 months, and another warm afternoon enveloped Phoenix as 21-year-old Angela Brasso prepared for a bike ride with her boyfriend, Joe Krakowicki. With their mountain bikes freshly serviced, Angela anticipated their routine 5-mile loop along the Diversion Channel Canal near their North Phoenix apartment. However, Joe decided not to go with, planning a surprise for Angela's upcoming birthday instead. Promising to return before their favorite TV show at 8 p.m., Angela set off with her Walkman on her hip. Yet as the night draped over Arizona and 8 o'clock came and went, Joe anxiously scanned the darkened landscape, waiting for Angela's return, growing increasingly worried as time stretched on without her. Joe pedaled along Angela's usual route beside the canal, but she was nowhere to be seen. Growing increasingly anxious, he raced back home, hoping to find her waiting there. But his fears mounted when she was still absent. Panic gripped him as he made 2 more frantic passes along the path, each time returning empty-handed. Finally, at 10:30 that night, Joe dialed the Phoenix police to report Angela missing. Detectives arrived at the apartment, questioning Joe as officers scoured the canal in search of any trace of Angela. In the kitchen, they noticed a knife in the sink, initially raising suspicions until they realized it was simply residue from the cake Joe had baked earlier. Throughout the night, Joe remained on edge, awaiting Angela's return. But his hopes were shattered when the next morning, news revealed a grim discovery near their home. Angela's lifeless body just feet from the canal bank. She had been savagely assaulted, her bicycle parts strewn along the canal path, her body bearing horrific wounds. The brutality of the attack shocked investigators, the depth of the injury suggesting a level of precision and expertise akin to that of a trained specialist. Days later, Angela's severed head was found miles away, further deepening the horror of the crime. Though never officially named a suspect, rumors swirled around Angela's boyfriend Joe, casting a shadow of suspicion over the tragic ordeal. However, investigators quickly ruled him out as a suspect when they discovered unidentified DNA on Angela's body. Regrettably, they lacked a match for it, leaving them at a dead end. Just a fortnight prior to Angela's tragic death, the severed arms of 19-year-old Diana Dawn Vicari, a student at Pima Community College, were discovered in a dumpster behind a business 120 miles south in Tucson. Initially, authorities suspected a connection between the 2 murders given their striking similarities. Yet with no DNA evidence at Diana's crime scene and her remaining body parts still missing, the link remained speculative. On September 21, 1994, Marlene Bernas bid farewell to her 17-year-old daughter, Melanie, as she ventured out for dinner with friends, assuring her return by 10 p.m. A student at Arcadia High School, Melanie, who had been homesick that day but had recovered by evening, mentioned her plan for a brief bike ride along the Arizona Canal near their residence. Departing at 7:30 p.m., Melanie and her bicycle vanished by the time her mother returned home at the agreed time. Alarmed, Marlene contacted her daughter's friends, only to find they had no news of her whereabouts. With growing concern, she reached out to nearby hospitals, fearing Melanie might have been involved in an accident. By 1 a.m., with no leads, Marlene contacted the authorities to report Melanie missing. The following morning, Charlotte Pottle and her family stumbled upon a disturbing sight as they cycled along the compact gravel banks of the Arizona Canal. A large pool of blood staining the path. Traces of blood dragged away from the pool vanished where the gravel met the canal's water. Detectives arrived on the scene, which lay just 360 feet from where Angela Brasso's severed head was discovered 10 months earlier. Though there was no evidence of a struggle, the presence of substantial blood loss and deep drag marks suggested a significant and possibly human-sized disturbance. Later that day, a city utility worker made a grim discovery. Melanie Bernas, floating face down in the canal. Stripped of the clothes she wore that evening, She was now wearing a turquoise bodysuit, a garment she did not own. Mirroring Angela's fate, Melanie still wore her socks and white tennis shoes. Her original attire was later recovered from a nearby dumpster. Melanie bore a deep stab wound in her back, piercing her lung and aorta, along with superficial cuts to her neck and chest. Carved into her chest and torso was a large cross, accompanied by the letters WSC etched just above her breast. Bruising on her inner thighs and wrists hinted at post-mortem sexual assault, suggesting she was abducted from the bike trail, murdered elsewhere, and then dumped in the canal, echoing Angela Brasso's tragic end. Like Angela, Melanie's bicycle was also missing. The assailant's DNA left behind through his sexual assault failed to match any entries in nationwide databases, leaving the case unsolved for 2 decades despite regular tips that led nowhere. Families and friends resigned themselves to the grim reality, their hopes of closure dwindling. Colleen Fitzpatrick, a renowned forensic scientist, genealogist, and entrepreneur, renowned for her expertise in forensic genealogy, having previously contributed to high-profile identifications such as victims of the Titanic disaster and an Alaska plane crash in 1948, Fitzpatrick crossed paths with detectives working on the Canal murders case during a 2014 Human Identification Symposium in Phoenix. Engaging with Fitzpatrick, the detective sought her assistance in deciphering the DNA evidence from the crime scenes, to which she eagerly agreed. Armed with the suspect's unknown Y-DNA profile, Fitzpatrick employed her proprietary genealogy software to scour public DNA databases for familial matches. While her technique was typically employed for male adoptees tracing their biological roots, Fitzpatrick recognized its potential in crime solving. Through her meticulous analysis, she narrowed down the DNA pool to 6 individuals bearing the surname Miller. To pinpoint the killer, investigators faced the daunting task of narrowing down their suspects further. They meticulously constructed an expansive family tree of the Miller lineage, meticulously tracing descendants and relatives residing in the vicinity of the murders. However, the ubiquity of the surname Miller posed a formidable challenge, one of the most common names in the United States. Over the years, detectives compiled a vast roster of potential suspects dubbed the Creepy Canal List, boasting over 800 names. Among them, only 6 shared the Miller surname. Delving into the backgrounds of each Miller, investigators swiftly honed in on a promising lead: Bryan Patrick Miller. A peculiar figure at 42, Bryan Patrick Miller indulged in eccentric role-playing antics, drawing attention with flamboyant displays. He roamed the streets of Phoenix in a retrofitted police car adorned with faux blood and rotating lights, emblazoned with the word Zombie Hunter across the trunk. His vehicle boasted wrought iron bars on its windows with a macabre, life-size zombie prop occupying the back seat. Embracing the steampunk subculture, Miller frequented local comic conventions and cosplay events, donning elaborate costumes complete with a gas mask and prop weaponry. Notably, he had a run-in with the law dating back to 1989 when he attacked a woman at the Paradise Valley Mall. During the Canal murder investigations, police stumbled upon a crucial tip regarding Miller. A friend of a friend revealed his possession of a turquoise bodysuit akin to the one Melanie Burness was found wearing. However, amidst the deluge of tips, this critical lead went unnoticed. Further damning evidence surfaced in the form of a chilling document penned by Miller at 18, ominously titled Plan, videotaped, detailing a gruesome 24-step scheme to kidnap, rape, and torture a teenage girl. The document outlined grotesque acts of violence, including dissection and cannibalism. Disturbingly, it even specified the tools for execution and the intention to preserve the victim's head as a trophy. Despite diligent efforts, detectives at the time failed to identify any victim matching the document's description. In January 2015, Phoenix police faced the critical task of obtaining Bryan Patrick Miller's DNA to corroborate evidence from the crime scenes. For weeks, detectives surveilled Miller, an employee at an Amazon warehouse, hoping for a chance to collect discarded DNA. When their initial attempts proved fruitless, they devised a more intricate plan. Aware of Miller's financial struggles as a single parent, an undercover police officer approached him during his lunch break in the Amazon parking lot, posing as a security employee and offering him a job to combat theft at the facility. Miller, in need of money, eagerly accepted the offer and agreed to meet at a nearby Chili's restaurant to discuss further. As planned, Miller appeared at Chili's later that day seeking the imaginary job. Seizing the opportunity, investigators retrieved a plastic mug Miller had used, finally securing his DNA sample. Subsequent analysis confirmed their suspicions. It was a match. A SWAT team descended on Miller's residence, uncovering a scene of severe hoarding. Every room was cluttered with boxes, refuse, toys, electronics, records, tapes, and sundry items, leaving only narrow pathways to navigate. Amidst the chaos, investigators discovered graphic pornography, both digital and printed, featuring violent acts against women. Images of mutilation and brutality adorned the walls, accompanied by a collection of macabre documentaries. During interrogation, Miller offered no credible explanation for the presence of his DNA at the crime scenes, vehemently denying involvement in the girls' deaths. Despite his protestations, he remained in custody for nearly 8 years before his trial commenced, during which both the prosecution and defense delved into the unsettling history of the man known as the Zombie Hunter. Miller's tumultuous upbringing unfolded in the trial proceedings. Born in Michigan in 1972 to teenage parents Ellen and Paul Miller, his early years were marred by turmoil. Following his father's tragic death in a motorcycle accident when Miller was 5, his mother, Ellen, subjected him to a cycle of abuse and instability, leaving scars that would shape his troubled path. Ellen's inappropriate behavior allegedly included forcing Bryan to watch disturbing, violent adult films and performing inappropriate acts on herself in front of him. Former neighbors vividly recall unsettling encounters between Ellen, a volatile single mother, and her reserved, introverted son who appeared perpetually subdued in her presence. Described by her own cousin as having a split personality, Ellen's sudden eruptions of anger were a source of fear for those around her. One particularly distressing incident stands out: Ellen's explosive reaction to 10-year-old Bryan over missing cookies, unfounded accusations escalating into emotional turmoil for the bewildered boy. Distraught, Bryan retreated into himself, resorting to self-harm as a means of coping with the chaos at home. Faced with threats of institutionalization from his mother, Bryan, desperate for relief, welcomed the idea, yearning for any respite from her tumultuous behavior. At the age of 10, Bryan's life underwent a drastic shift as Ellen abruptly relocated them to Arizona, disrupting his sense of stability. Yet far from providing sanctuary, their new home became a crucible of abuse, exacerbating Bryan's already fragile state. By December 1987, at the age of 15, Bryan's anguish reached a breaking point, leading to his admission to an inpatient mental health facility following a week-long escape from home. Subsequently enrolled in the Arizona Youth for Change program, Bryan and Ellen were required to attend weekly family therapy sessions, during which Ellen's continued outbursts and inappropriate conduct towards her son were documented by staff. One particularly troubling incident saw Ellen accusing teenage Bryan of mutilating her Barbie doll collection, cutting a vagina into all of them, further underscoring the toxic environment in which Bryan was raised. Miller stood out to therapists as particularly troubled compared to other children in the program. His struggles included fits of rage, neglect of personal hygiene, and a concerning habit of setting fires. In May 1989, at the age of 16, he faced charges of criminal damage following an incident where he violently threw a radio and tore a chalkboard off the wall. As a result, he was confined to Adobe Mountain Juvenile Detention Facility until his parole release in March 1990, just before his 18th birthday. Despite receiving therapy and medication during his time there, Miller's severe behavioral issues continued to persist. Barely months following his release, Miller committed a violent act, stabbing 24-year-old Celeste Bentley outside the Paradise Valley shopping mall. This incident served as a grim foreshadowing of the further violence he would perpetrate. Miller attempted to flee, but law enforcement swiftly captured him. He was subsequently charged with attempted murder and returned to Adobe Mountain Juvenile Detention Facility, where he remained until his 18th birthday. It was on his 18th birthday that his mother turned over his 24-step handwritten plan to kidnap, rape, and torture a teenage girl. Following his stint in juvenile detention, Miller found accommodation by working for churches, which provided him with free housing. By the summer of 1993, he shared an apartment with a colleague named Randy McGlade. The day after Melanie Burness' murder, McGlade casually joked with Miller about his whereabouts, suggesting he might have been on the canal that night. Miller coldly brushed off the insinuation, claiming he was on the east side of Phoenix, far from where Melanie was discovered. Despite Miller's dismissive response, McGlade harbored suspicions, particularly when police released a photo of the turquoise bodysuit found on Melanie's body, a garment he had previously seen in Miller's possession. McGlade shared his concerns with a friend who subsequently alerted the authorities, providing a vital yet overlooked tip. In 1996, Miller crossed paths with Amy, whom he later married. The couple relocated to Washington State, where they welcomed a baby daughter. However, in 2002, Miller's violent tendencies resurfaced when he was arrested for stabbing a woman named Melissa Ruiz Ramirez. Despite claiming self-defense, Miller was acquitted in 2003 after a trial marked by conflicting testimonies. During his pre-trial incarceration, Miller wrote disturbing letters to Amy detailing his sexual fantasies involving needles and knives. Upon learning of Miller's history of violence against women, Amy filed for divorce shortly after their return to Arizona. Surprisingly, Miller was granted custody of their daughter. Finally, on October 3, 2022, Miller faced trial for the murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernis. Opting for a bench trial, Miller entrusted his fate solely to Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Suzanne Cohen. Over 6 months, the defense sought to establish Miller's insanity at the time of the murders, presenting expert witnesses who testified to his history of trauma and mental health conditions, including dissociation, autism, and PTSD. The defense delved deeply into Miller's tumultuous upbringing, arguing that the extensive abuse inflicted by his mother had left him psychologically damaged to the extent that he could not distinguish between right and wrong, nor fully comprehend the gravity of his actions when he killed Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernis. Central to the insanity defense was Miller's purported dissociative identity disorder, stemming from the traumatic abuse he endured during childhood. Essentially, the defense contended that Miller possessed an alternate identity responsible for the acts, and he had no recollection of them. In contrast, the prosecution challenged Miller's claims of amnesia, highlighting instances where he displayed clear memory and accountability for other criminal activities, such as the assaults on Celeste Bentley and Melissa Ruiz Ramirez. They argued that Miller conveniently invoked amnesia only regarding the Canal murders, suggesting a calculated defense strategy rather than genuine memory loss. Moreover, the prosecution emphasized Miller's deliberate preparation, citing his choice to bring a knife to both crime scenes and, in Melanie Bernis's case, a turquoise bodysuit, indicative of premeditation. They underscored Miller's efforts to conceal evidence, including moving the victims' bodies and disposing of incriminating clothing and weapons, as evidence of intentional planning, and contradicted Miller's claims of memory loss. The prosecution bolstered their argument with disturbing photographic evidence, vividly depicting the harrowing brutality inflicted upon the victims. Graphic crime scene images revealed Angela Brasso's gruesome decapitation and the severe mutilation of Melanie Bernis's torso, serving to underscore the heinous nature of Miller's crimes. They also presented photographs depicting the sadistic carving and mutilation inflicted by Miller on the bodies of both girls. By showcasing this disturbing visual evidence, the prosecution emphasized that the term murder fell short in describing the horrors endured by Angela and Melanie. Given the extreme level of violence and cruelty, the state argued that the calculated and intentional nature of these acts spoke volumes about Miller's depravity, countering the defense's portrayal of him as a mentally unstable victim of childhood trauma. On April 11, 2022, Judge Cohen rendered Bryan Patrick Miller guilty on all 6 charges, 2 counts each of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and attempted sexual assault. During the sentencing phase following Miller's conviction, the defense shifted its strategy to highlight mitigating factors that warranted leniency rather than the death penalty. Miller's attorneys pointed to instances of his positive actions, such as his dedication to raising his daughter as a single father and active involvement in steampunk and cosplay communities. They reiterated the trauma he had endured from childhood abuse inflicted by his mother, Ellen, and urged Judge Cohen to show mercy by sentencing Miller to life imprisonment without parole. Though Miller's daughter did not attend the hearing, she wrote a letter expressing her desire for a future relationship with her father, acknowledging his efforts despite imperfections. The prosecution countered the defense's plea for mercy by asserting that Miller's crimes stemmed from conscious adult choices, reflecting his inherent sadistic tendencies rather than mere products of childhood abuse or youthful indiscretions. They argued that Miller, as a grown man, deliberately chose to brutally murder and mutilate 2 young women, emphasizing his responsibility as an adult. Angela Brasso's mother also addressed Judge Cohen, advocating for the maximum penalty and sharing the profound loss she experienced due to her daughter's absence. On June 8, Judge Cohen delivered her verdict to the packed courtroom, stating that there was no doubt Miller deserved the death penalty. The accumulation of mitigating factors was not substantial enough to warrant leniency. Bryan Patrick Miller offered no explanation or apology for his actions, expressing only a desire to find answers and learn more about himself in the process. Brandy Myers, the 13-year-old who went missing, has never been found. She is suspected to be dead as a result of foul play. Authorities believe Miller played a role in her disappearance, but with no evidence linking him to the crime. The likelihood of him facing charges is low.